In this video, I want to cover what the best starter builds are for each class in Project Diablo 2. And by starter builds, I'm not talking about leveling builds, although I will mention briefly what's the best way to level each class and what skill you want to use to level each class. But by starter builds, I am referring to the builds that you want to use very early on in the game to start farming. Right, so let's say you just completed hell difficulty and you're something like maybe level 65, 70, and you want to start farming, you want to start dropping gear to make your character more powerful. What makes these builds powerful starter builds? It's less so much about balance. It's not so much that these builds are particularly OP or anything like that, or the damage is very high. Rather, these builds just have some sort of mechanic that makes them very potent early on. And so this list should be fairly evergreen. A lot of these builds have been the strongest or one of the strongest starter builds for most of Project Diablo 2's history. And so even if you're watching this video far into the future, you should feel fairly comfortable using any of these builds as your starter build. That being said, if there is ever going to be a very big nerf or very big change, I'll try to keep this video up to date either in the comments or in the description. Now I'm going to briefly cover each build for the sake of time. I can't really go into all 7 builds. For that, I'm going to make a separate video for each build in each class. Those I'm going to link in the description as I get those videos out. But let's first cover the type of gear or the level of gear that we're using, as different people might have different ideas as to what type of gear is considered to be starter gear. The type of gear that we're using are all going to be very easy to acquire. They involve some very common runes. Right here we see the classic starter package from Lord of Destruction, right? A Spirit, Stealth, Lore, Ancient's Pledge. Some alternatives to this is simply something like a 3-socket helmet with a few runes for resistance, a 3 to 4 socket armor. Right, you can just sort of mix and match whatever runes to cover whatever resistances you need. And these two pieces may seem pretty scuffed compared to a built-in rune word, but because of how important resistance is for a lot of characters, this is going to be a worthwhile trade-off. For the rest of the gear that don't involve runes, we're just going to be using items that you can buy from vendors. You can either get a set of resistance items, or you can get faster cast rate. Yes, in Project Diablo 2, you can actually get faster cast rate on blue and yellow items. For rings, you're going to use either faster cast rate or resistance as well. To shop this gear, all you really have to do is you can shop from any vendor, but an easier way to do so is you go to Bara and buy one of these PvP maps or arenas. You open the portal next to the vendor you want to shop, and you can just you can easily refresh the shop by going in and out of this portal. And you can shop resistance or faster cast rate items very easily this way. There's a 3-socket helmet. When it comes to your amulet, you can craft a prismatic amulet by putting one of each gem into your cube and one random blue amulet. Doesn't matter what it is. And by transmuting, you're going to get a prismatic amulet that gives you between 15 to 20 all resistance. So this is sort of the base level of gear that every character is going to use. There are going to be some class specific items that each class can utilize. For example, a Necromancer can shop wands that have 3 to poison and bone skills, or curses, or summons. Assassins can shop 3 to trap claws or 3 to martial arts claws from Anya. Amazons have it even easier. they can just flat out drop a white base that has up to 3 javelin and spear skills or 3 to bow and crossbow skills. And some classes have some specific rune words like peace, for example. This is only a shell thal am, so it's not much harder to get than any of these rune words. So this is the general level of gear with which I've compared these builds to others. All of the gear that we're going to be using is going to be as easy to get as these. Some classes are going to have some potentially stronger class specific items and gear, but they're not going to be any harder to get than something like this. So with that said, let's get into these builds. First, I want to start with the most casual friendly, noob friendly builds and the most casual friendly classes. And so we're going to start with Amazons. Now, Amazons are probably one of the easiest classes to start, and that's because of Valkyries. So Valkyries, no matter what Amazon build you want to play, you're going to want to get Valkyries to level 20. Now, level 20 includes items. So in this case, with lore and peace, I have 18 points in Valkyries to get to level 20. Because at level 20, you can summon a second Valk. And with the peace armor, you can summon an additional Valkyrie, giving you 3 Valkyries. Now, Valkyries, they can tank damage for you. They can deal both physical and lightning damage, as well as having splash damage. And so you can pretty much just stand behind Valkyries without having to worry about your defense or damage mitigation, right? I could be completely AFK, and these Valkyries will kill this entire pack for me. Now, they don't have the best clear speed, but this handles pretty much all of your survivability that you'll need. I don't even have capped resistances. So, whatever Amazon build you want to play, make sure to utilize Valkyries to take care of your defense and your damage mitigation early on. Now, the build that I'm going to recommend is Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is just an overall very powerful build. It's just one of the top builds and has been for a while. But Lightning Strike has a lot of synergies with Valkyrie. For one, Power Strike is a synergy for both Lightning Strike and a Valkyrie. So a Lightning Strike build is going to have stronger Valkyries than any other Amazon build. On top of this, you can get an Act 3 Lightning Merc. The Act 3 Lightning Merc will cast Static Field. And Static Field lowers the lightning resistance of enemies. This is the little effect on top of them. So he will increase both the damage of you and your Valkyries. On top of this, he is able to break some lightning immunes for you. Those of Abyss Knights are actually lightning immune. Power Strike is also going to be the skill that you want to use to level any Amazon. At level 6, you simply dump your points into Lightning Strike and you're going to be leveling very smoothly. So the next character I want to cover is the Necromancer. The Necromancer has revives, which you're going to use just like the Valkyries. Pretty much whatever class you want to play on a Necromancer, you want to put at least 1 point into revive. I would recommend putting 4 points, but at least 1 point into revive will allow you to resurrect 3 enemies. Putting 1 point into Desecrate is going to allow you to generate corpses. And so you're just going to revive some mobs. So you're going to want to target the melee mobs, since these will run up to enemies and block them from reaching you. Additionally, every Necromancer is going to have at least 1 point into Blood Warp, the teleport skill. And in doing so, this is going to allow you to get a Blood Golem or a Clay Golem. And so much like the Amazon, These summons will just tank damage for you. These will not do as much damage as the Valkyries that the Amazons have, but they are overall tankier than the Valkyries. And so no matter what Necromancer you're playing, you're going to want to utilize these summons to deal with your damage mitigation. I'm standing here AFK, I'm not dying, I have negative resistances. Now the build that I would recommend starting with is going to be a Bone Necro. Compared to something like a Poison Necro or a Corpse Explosion Necro, Bone Necros are just overall more well-rounded. They don't really worry about immunities because they deal magic damage. And overall, they're just the most straightforward build to play. Now, the easy way to level Necromancer is to simply go Skeleton Mages or just a Skeliomancer. You're just going to max out the 3 Skeleton summoning skills and Skeleton Mastery, as well as putting 1 point into Revive just to have those tank for you. And the leveling process with this should be very smooth. For Druid, I actually recommend going a full-on Summoner Druid. Now, for the Amazon and the Necromancer, I didn't actually recommend going a fully fledged Summoner build. That's because Summoners, they trade off clear speed for survivability compared to self-cast builds. So for the Amazon and the Necromancer, we utilize summons to give ourselves survivability and damage mitigation, but then we cast our own skills for better clear speed. But for the Druid, it's a little different, and that's because of Ravens. Ravens function very differently from traditional summons. They don't have any life. They can't be, stunned or slowed. They fly over enemies, so they don't block each other. They don't get stuck behind gaps. Right? They can fly over gaps. They'll deal both physical and cold damage, so they can deal with immunities. And so for Druid, the Raven can compensate for some of the weaknesses of a pure Summoner build, and it augments their overall clear speed. So a fully fledged Summoner build is very solid for a Druid. Raven is also an amazing leveling skill, so you don't have to worry about wasting a respec going a pure Summoner for leveling as well. So for these 3 classes, I consider these to be the easiest classes to start. For new players, I highly recommend using one of these classes. You just utilize summons to deal with your survivability, take some of the pressure off of your items. And you should have really no problem starting with these builds. For Assassins, the best starter build is going to be a Lightning Trapper. Now, you'll level as a Fire Trapper, but eventually Wake of Fire falls off, as well as you end up running into a lot of fire immunes. Lightning traps are very strong. They deal more damage than fire traps, but they have less AoE. But you're gonna need that damage early on. They also have Fire Blast as a synergy, so this can help you deal with lightning immunes. You're also going to be using the Act 3 Lightning Merc like the Amazon, so this can help break some lightning immunes as well as just overall increase your lightning damage from the traps. Assassins also have access to a lot of utility skills. You're going to use either Burst of Speed for movement and attack speed or Fade for resistance. Weapon Block gives you some extra survivability. Cloak of Shadows is really strong. I'll go into Cloak of Shadows in a little bit, and you definitely want to spend the 2 points to get Shadow Master. Shadow Masters are very good at absorbing damage and aggro for you. They're not going to be as effective as the Valkyries or the Revives from the previous 3 builds and the summons from the previous 3 builds that we talked about, but they are going to be very good at taking aggro off of you, allowing you to use the squishy Act 3 Merc. So Cloak of Shadows is a skill that just blinds enemies. Under Cloak of Shadows, they basically stop attacking and de-aggro you. They only really continue attacking you if you walk within melee range. But just like that, it just basically makes them inert. And you can drop some traps, Cloak of Shadows them, and the traps will kill them for you while they're under Cloak of Shadows. It gives you a lot of extra room and leeway on top of the Shadow Master that you're going to be using. Something else I want to mention about the Lightning Trapper is a lot of people like to farm Arcane Sanctuary, particularly in early game, to get some runes. And typically they go with a lightning sword, since there's no lightning immunes, as well as the sword can teleport over the gaps. But the lightning trapper is by far the best Arcane Sanctuary farmer. It clears significantly faster, as well as having a pseudo teleport with Dragonflight. So if you're someone who really likes farming Arcane Sanctuary, I highly recommend trying out the Lightning Trapper. For the Paladin, I'm going to actually mention two builds. Number one is going to be the classic Hammerdin. Number two is going to be the Fist of Heaven or the Full Pally. The Hammerdin just has the highest clear speed, the highest damage by far out of any of the best starter builds. And the reason for this is because the hammers don't have particularly good range. You have to get very close to enemies. The hammers are slow. It takes a long time to travel the full distance. As well as there's some blind spots that may cause the hammers to miss. Now in Project Diablo 2, they have actually buffed hammers so that they actually travel a little faster and have a larger hitbox, resulting in fewer blind spots. But overall, these limitations are what keeps the Hammerdin from becoming a broken endgame build. But early on, the damage output of Hammerdins is what makes it the fastest farming build in early game. It also makes them the fastest characters to get into maps and start farming maps efficiently. And so on a Hammerdin, all you really need is a Spirit Sword, a Spirit Shield, and just a bunch of faster cast rate and res items, and you can start farming chaos. If you can cap your res, you can start farming chaos at like I've farmed chaos level 65 before. But not everybody wants to play the Hammerdin. It's a pretty try-hard playstyle. You have to teleport on top enemies, you gotta use your potions. You gotta stutter step to cover your blind spots. And a lot of people have played Hammerdins for 20 years, from Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction. And so that's why I want to also mention the Fist of Heaven's Pally. The Fist of Heaven's Pally is pretty much the exact opposite of a Hammerdin. Fist of Heavens has really good mechanics. It has pretty much unlimited range. It has really large AoE. But it doesn't have the best damage. While it's not as strong as a Hammerdin, it's still an overall very potent starter build. Before I forget, I also want to mention that to level a Paladin, you're going to start with a Holy Fire Pally. You just start dumping points into this at level 6. It's going to add a bunch of fire damage to your attacks, and you're going to use either Zeal or Sacrifice depending on the situation you find yourself in. In the next patch, Zeal and Sacrifice is going to switch places. Zeal is going to become available at level 1, Sacrifice level 6. And so for early leveling, you're just going to run around with the Holy Fire aura active and using Zeal and Sacrifice. The last two characters I'm going to cover, the Barbarian and the Sorc, are going to be the weaker starter builds. They're not particularly weak necessarily, as they take a little more gear to get started. For the Barbarian, the best starter build is going to be Whirlwind. And this is because Whirlwind just has a lot of very favorable mechanics for when you're just starting out and you're working with very low gear. So Whirlwind, you don't need any attack speed in your gear. There's only one breakpoint. Also, while you're whirling, you can't be put into hit recovery, you can't be stunned. So, compared to the other melee skills that require you to get close to enemies, one of the big issues is taking a bunch of damage and being stunned and not being able to act. Whirlwind bypasses this. Whirlwind also doesn't have any synergies, which allows you to max Battle Cry, which lowers enemy physical resistance. This can break immunes as well as it's just a big multiplier to your damage. Other builds are not going to have the luxury of maxing out Battle Cry. Whirlwind also doesn't care about being frozen, so you don't need cannot be frozen compared to other skills like Frenzy or Double Throw. And on top of this, for Whirlwind, you only really need one strong weapon compared to something like Frenzy or Double Throw. You need two weapons, as well as Double Throw, for example, requires more specific weapons. Whereas Whirlwind, you can just get any high damage two-hander. Now, how to actually get a strong weapon to get started for the Whirlwind Barb is going to be a little more complicated compared to the items that other builds have used. Mostly because a lot of these caster items, you don't even care about the base that it's in, you just care about the modifiers, whereas an attack build really cares about both the runeword and the base that the runeword is placed in. But for getting a strong weapon, I'm going to have a completely separate video covering how to get your first decently high damage weapon so that you can start farming if you're playing a build that needs a high damage weapon. So that's going to be linked in the description. So Whirlwind Barb, you're gonna catch a Battle Cry, and you're gonna use Whirlwind. This is going to be a lot more effective than something like Double Throw early on. If you look at the gear that this barb is using, it's just this weapon, which has some damage. The runes aren't very expensive, and it's just a bunch of resistance items. This has mana leech. These are all just resistance items. Now, if you want to level a barb, you should level with Frenzy. You can just put on the strongest weapons you can get. It should be pretty smooth at the very least to get through normal. But it's also worth noting that there's a support barb build that if you play in a group, you can buff your team with battle commands and battle orders. You're not going to deal any damage, but you use leap to help your teammates because leap, not leap attack, pushes back enemies when you jump into them. And so with this, you can just kind of chain stun enemies while your teammates deal the damage and kill them. Now, something worth noting is that out of all of the builds in this video, the Whirlwind Barb and the Summoner Druid, they fall off faster than the others. The other classes and the builds that I've mentioned, as you get better gear, they stay as the top starter builds. Again, the Whirlwind Barb is going to be the strongest when you're using very low level gear, but a Double Throw Barb is going to outscale a Whirlwind Barb with day 1 or day 2 gear. Let's say you have something like, you don't have the perfect throw items, but let's say you have something like, a Demon's Arch and a War Strike. These items aren't the, ideal throw weapons. You probably want something like a Lacerator and a Wraith Flight. But even with kind of decent gear and then something like a Hustle, the throw barb catches up pretty quickly. The throw barb is going to have better range, right? Better AoE, better single target. And so if you wanted to play a throw barb, you could very easily start as a Whirlwind Barb, farm for maybe a day or two, or maybe even shorter. And once you get even to some decently solid, strong throw weapons, you can switch over pretty quickly. It's the same deal with the Summoner Druid. Summoner Druid is very potent at the level of gear that I've used in this video. But once you get a few things going, something like a Shockwave Druid is going to vastly outperform a Summoner Druid. If you can get something like a Jalal's Mane. You get a 3 to shape-shifting skills amulet. You can get something like a level 29 Shockwave. At that point, a Shockwave Druid is going to vastly outperform a Summoner Druid. So it's good to keep in mind that these two builds are the ones that kind of fall off. Well, they don't fall off so much as other builds start to catch up and outperform it, such as a Shockwave Druid or a double throw Barb. The other builds that I mentioned stay either as the top starter build or one of the top starter builds. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Sorceress. Ironically, in PD2, the Sorceress, in my opinion, is one of the worst classes to start. The reason for this is because the Sorcerers, they trade off survivability for mobility, right? They can teleport, but they really lack in survivability, and they're the squishiest class at the beginning. Compared to Lord of Destruction, every single class can deal a lot of damage. And in Project Diablo 2, you don't need teleport to find places to farm. A lot of these zones have been vastly improved, and so teleport is a lot less important in PD2 than it is in Lord of Destruction. And so the advantages that made this Sorceress the only starter build in Lord of Destruction are a lot less prevalent in Project Diablo 2. The trade-off of survivability for teleport is going to make Sorceresses a lot harder to play early on. So if you're a new player, I don't recommend starting a Sorceress. You should only really start a Sorceress if you have, let's say, a specific strategy that you wanted to implement that requires a Sorceress to teleport. Maybe you want to farm Mephisto or Andariel or even Diriel. There is no other class that can farm these bosses efficiently aside from the Sorceress. You have to be able to teleport to farm those areas. And so if you have a specific area, a specific place that you want to farm, then the build that you're going to use is going to depend on where you want to farm. So for example, if you're farming Andariel, you can go something like Frozen Orb, you can go Blizzard, you can go Meteor. For Diriel, you can use something like Inferno. For Mephisto, you can go with some of the cold skills like Frozen Orb, Blizzard, or Inferno as well. If you're farming Arcane Sanctuary, you're gonna go with a Chain Lightning Sword. So for the Sorceress, it's mostly a build that is mostly a class that you're only going to use if you really know what you're doing. If you have a specific place that you want to farm, you have a build ready for that area, and you know the type of gear that you need to farm those areas. So it's kind of ironic. It's kind of interesting that it's kind of flipped around. The Sorceress is probably the weakest starter build if you just want to use it for general farming. With that being said, if you did really want to just start a Sorceress for general farming, I'd recommend going with something like Blizzard or Frozen Orb, because Cold just has less of an issue with immunities than Fire or Lightning. And Frozen Orb just kind of has an overall, it's pretty well balanced between single target and AoE. Decent AoE, decent single target. Now, if you didn't want to start a Sorceress, to level a Sorceress, you're going to go with Inferno. Inferno itself is not really that broken of a leveling skill. It's more that this runeword Leaf exists. And if you shop a 2-socket 3 to Inferno staff, which you can do very easily from a car in Act 1 normal, you can actually get an item that gives you +8 to Inferno at level 19. As soon as you hit level 19 and put on the Leaf, you're going to get a big power spike, and your leveling is just going to be very smooth from there. So these are the best starter builds for each class, with the gear normalized to gear that you can get reliably without any sort of RNG. Pretty much around level 70 and further. These are all the builds that I recommend you use when you want to start farming. If you have any questions, or if you're wondering if, let's say, how one of these builds compares to another one, feel free to ask in the comments down below. Also, if you want to check out my live stream, I'm streaming at Mr. Sparkles on Twitch TV. and don't hesitate to ask me any questions when I'm live.